I think the most iconic warrior in history is the Mounted Knight. Like, it's either the knight or the samurai, but the Mounted Knight, it's something beautiful and terrifying at the same time. The heavy cavalry charge, it's something that's glorified in Hollywood also. Like, what is more iconic than the Riders of Rohan at Minas Tirith? You even have people in their real life go to the Medieval Times tournament or Renaissance fairs where the main attraction is always the joust. Horses are so important to medieval combat that they were included in the Chivalry 2 trailer. The developers, they spent a tremendous amount of time and money motion capturing them and designing maps around them, and when they finally were put in the game, it was a pretty significant feature, and yet the player base completely rejected the Mounted Warfare queue. The developers, intent on getting a return on their time and investment, stubbornly pushed out more and more horse-related content that no one played until finally admitting horses were a fail with the removal of the Mounted Warfare queue in patch 2.9. But why did the player base completely reject Mounted Warfare, a mode that was worked so hard on and that so many players asked for? I'm Strider the Champ, and in today's video, I'm going to discuss why the Mounted Warfare queue died. Now, to start our story, we have to go back all the way to 2021 when Chivalry released on the Epic Games Store. Now, Torn Banner released Chivalry 2 with very little marketing and a one-year exclusivity agreement with Epic Games. Basically, they took a bag of money to keep the game off of Steam. While the game, it released in a decent, playable state as far as combat goes, this almost felt like an early access year where we didn't have core features like true crossplay, and many aspects of the game, like the party system, just simply did not work. The game also released without horses. Gamers are fickle people, and they don't always respond to change well, and the game releasing as infantry only meant the most hardcore of Chivalry players had a year to enjoy and learn the melee combat system. Many of the original Epic gamers are still hardcore Chivalry 2 players and make up the heart and soul of the community. They liked the balance of the game, they were used to how the maps played, and they loved the combat system. Anything that would mess those things up would not be overly welcomed by those people. I mean, just look at the official Discord feedback channel. When a weapon speed is adjusted by 0.1 of a tenth of a second, people go crazy. And if gamers respond so poorly to minor changes, just imagine when you add the medieval tank to the battlefield, which drastically changes how maps would flow, objectives would be balanced, and it interrupts the beloved melee combat system, and now players, they're going to be ridden over and killed in one shot by a lance. And this is where we talk about how gamers, especially serious gamers, absolutely hate one-shot mechanics in games. Go to any Call of Duty or FPS chat, and people constantly hate on snipers because while it might be fun to snipe, no one likes getting shot from a mile away with no counterplay. In Chivalry, we already had catapults, we already had ballistas, and while not always a one-shot, we had the crossbow, which is often one-shot. We would now be adding multiple mounted players to the map who can also one-shot you with a lance. And this was my problem with horses in Mordhau. I actually hated cavalry mains in Mordhau more than I hated archers, because it was just super low skill for a one-shot high reward. But here's the thing, the developers, they don't care about the hardcore player getting pissed off about being one-shot by a noob on a horse or a ballista. They care about the noobs having fun and convincing their friends to buy the game. And horses were released when Chivalry 2 expected an incredible amount of new players with the Steam release. Hundreds of thousands of players who had never even heard of Chivalry would see the game on the store and have a chance to hop in and have the time of their life racing around on the battlefield, lance in hand. But here was the problem. Torn Banner was never able to get horses to be able to run in 64-player team objective mode without crashing the last generation consoles. 64-player team objective is the game's flagship mode. It's the mode the game was designed around, and the first thing you see when you enter the game. The extreme majority of the player base only plays on 64-player team objective, and it's been proven throughout time that other modes, they struggle to maintain players. So rather than spend more time in the lab trying to figure out how to get the horses in the main mode, the developers released a special Mounted Warfare queue. This mode, it was fun for about all of an hour because horses were only added to, I believe, 3 or 4 maps at the time. Now, while initial feedback on horses was pretty mixed, from people hating them for how clunky they were to people loving the fresh gameplay loop, there were not many people who were willing to play the same 4 horse maps for months straight. It got really repetitive. I'm actually someone who kind of likes the horses. I think the melee combat works nicely when mounted. The horses feel much closer to good than Mordhaus did. But I don't like the horses enough to skip out on 64 player and be stuck in Tenosia just non-stop. The veteran players very quickly burned out on mounted warfare, and all the casuals Torn Banner expected to stay with the game for months. Well, many of them, they had their fun, enjoyed their time, but they quickly moved on to the next flavor of the week game, leaving the queue to be mostly dead, occasionally getting a full server of players who misclicked modes, didn't know better, or are playing the game for the very first time. And Torn Banner, they were not happy about this. They invested time and money into horses, and understandably, they probably were pissed the mode was doing so poorly. They had the option here. Either you cut your losses, or double down and continue to shove horses down the player base's throat, and they said, get on your knees and open up wide. We then proceeded to receive over a year's worth of mounted warfare content, whether exclusive maps like the Hippodrome, or adding horses to existing maps like Lionspire or Aberfell. However, even with the map variety, the players never came back to the mode. Actually, at this point in time, I do not believe I have ever played Lionspire horses, but even when I did try some of the mounted maps, the horses, they felt kind of forced. Now, there are places for a medieval cavalry charge, but the hills on Thake Stronghold or Montcrux don't really feel like those places. I think the horses would trip and fall. It seemed like the boxes were being checked, like, we want to announce horses added to this map, so let's just say fuck it and add them wherever we can. And we continued on this path up until patch 2.9, where Torn Banner finally said, you know what, the mode, it doesn't seem to be working, and mounted warfare was completely removed from the match selection. Now, they didn't fully remove horses, they added them to the 40-player team objective maps, but this also pissed off the people who play 40-player because, once again, it massively changes the balance of the games. When 10 players are mounted out of the total 40, the objectives, they won't get done, the petards, they don't get carried. Once again, you're changing a mode that there was a group of players who really enjoyed to give them horses. And I actually think that horses could have been effective and loved in Chivalry 2, but for that to happen, they would have to have been released in 64-player team objective, and they would have needed to be there at the game's release. If each team had 2 or 3 horses from day one, I think it would just be a normal part of our gameplay experience now. Ultimately, horses came to the game too late, and the feature alone was not good enough for players to overlook playing in an alternate queue, playing on a limited set of maps, and having to deal with changes to modes that they already loved and enjoyed. In hindsight, I wish the developers had used those resources and time on creating new content for the game in the form of maps and weapons than spending a year on horses. I'll trade horse combat for flail, no question asked, any day of the week. Now, I do expect Torn Banner to learn some lessons here, and if and when we get a Chivalry 3, I can almost guarantee horses will be there from day one, because in Chivalry 2, Mounted Warfare, it's just completely dead. So let me know in the comments, did you enjoy the implementation of horses in Chivalry 2? And if you enjoyed the discussion, now is the time to subscribe. Champ out.